The cold space around Kepler 442 held no sound. But inside the research ship UES Discovery, the hum of machines never stopped. Captain Jake Morrison walked through the narrow halls, checking on his crew of 43 people who had been working in this empty part of space for 3 months now. They were far from Earth, far from any help, studying things that most people would never understand. Dr. Lisa Warren looked up from her screen when Jake entered the main lab. Her eyes were tired from staring at numbers and charts all day, but she still smiled at him. She pointed to the display showing strange patterns of energy that seemed to dance across the darkness between stars. These patterns were too neat, too organized to be natural, but they were also unlike anything humans had seen before. "The readings are getting stronger," Lisa said, her voice quiet in the humming room. "Whatever is making these energy signatures, it is big and it is moving toward the inner systems." Jake nodded and moved to the window that showed nothing but stars and empty space. He had been a ship captain for 15 years, and he knew when something felt wrong. The galaxy was not a safe place for humans. Most of the alien races saw Earth people as tough but stupid, good for hard work and fighting, but not much else. They called Earth a death world because it was so dangerous that most aliens would die just from breathing its air or drinking its water. This reputation had its good points. Human ships could travel through war zones because nobody thought they were worth attacking. While the big alien empires fought each other for territory and resources, human traders and explorers moved freely through the contested areas, picking up what they could find and staying out of the way of the real powers. But Jake knew that this safety was not real. Sooner or later, one of the big alien groups would decide that humans were becoming too numerous or too useful to their enemies. When that happened, Earth and all its colonies would become targets. The communication system beeped, and Lieutenant Kelly Brooks called out from the bridge. "Captain, we have an urgent message from Earth Defense Command. It is marked Priority Alpha." Jake hurried to the bridge where Kelly was waiting with a worried look on her face. She handed him the message pad, and he read the short text that made his blood feel cold. Admiral Ryan Collins had sent the same message to every human ship in space. All human vessels are to maintain radio silence and assume stealth protocols immediately. The hegemony is moving. The hegemony was the thing that every human military officer had nightmares about. 12 of the most powerful alien species had joined together to control more than half of known space. They had technology that was hundreds of years ahead of Earth science, and they had billions of ships and soldiers. If the hegemony had decided that humanity was a problem that needed to be solved, then the war that everyone feared was about to begin. Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. Kelly was young but smart, and she had served on 3 different ships before coming to the Discovery. Engineer Sam Peterson was checking the stealth systems that would hide their ship from alien sensors. Navigator Helen Carter was already plotting courses through asteroid fields and nebula clouds where they could hide if enemy ships came looking for them. "Send confirmation to Earth Command that we received the message," Jake told Kelly. "Then shut down all long-range communications and activate full stealth mode. From now on, we are invisible." The next few hours passed slowly as the crew prepared for what might come. Jake called a meeting in the main conference room and told everyone what the message meant. Some of the younger crew members looked scared, but the older ones just nodded. They had all known this day would come eventually. Dr. Warren pulled up her star charts and showed the energy readings she had been tracking. "If these signatures are hegemony scout ships, then they have been watching human space for weeks," she said. "They know where our colonies are, where our defense fleets are positioned, everything." Jake studied the patterns on her screen. The energy signatures were moving in a way that suggested they were mapping human territory, learning about defenses and weak points. But there was something else, something that made him think the aliens might not know as much as they thought they did. "They are treating us like any other species," he said slowly. "They think we will fight the way other aliens fight, with big fleets meeting in open space for direct battles." Sam looked up from his engineering console. "But that is not how humans fight, is it?" Jake smiled for the first time since receiving the message. No, it is not. We learned how to fight on a planet that was trying to kill us every day. We learned to hide, to strike fast, and to use the enemy's strength against them. The hegemony has never fought anyone like us. Over the next 2 days, more messages came through on secret channels that the aliens did not know about. Human colonies were reporting hegemony fleets moving toward them. The enemy was coming in force, expecting easy victories against what they saw as primitive fighters from a backwater world, but Jake and his crew, along with thousands of other humans scattered across space, were ready for something the hegemony could not imagine. They had spent decades preparing for this war, building hidden bases, training in secret, and developing weapons and tactics that no alien race had ever seen. As the Discovery drifted silently through the darkness, its stealth systems making it invisible to enemy sensors, Jake thought about Earth and the long road that had brought humanity to this moment. They were the children of a world that had tried to kill them with ice ages, plagues, earthquakes, and storms. They had survived by being tougher, smarter, and more adaptable than anything their planet could throw at them. Now the galaxy was about to learn what that meant. The first reports came 3 days after Admiral Collins sent his warning message. Human colonies on New Boston, Terra Verde, and Covenant Station had fallen to hegemony forces. The alien fleets had arrived with overwhelming numbers, and the human defenders seemed to break apart like paper in a storm. Commander Alex Turner watched the battle reports on his ship's main screen as the destroyer USWAS pulled back from the Kepler 442 system. His crew was quiet, their faces showing the strain of what looked like a complete disaster. The hegemony had brought hundreds of ships to each target, massive vessels that could destroy human colonies with their smallest weapons, but Alex knew something that the enemy did not. The defeats were not real failures but carefully planned retreats. Every human ship that ran from the alien fleets carried precious information about enemy tactics, weapon types, and fleet organization. This data was flowing back to secret command centers hidden throughout human space. Lieutenant Kelly Brooks sat at her communications station listening to the enemy radio chatter. The hegemony officers were celebrating their easy victories, talking about how weak and cowardly the humans were. They spoke about the war as if it were already over, just a simple cleanup operation to remove a minor pest from their territory. They think we are running because we are scared, Kelly said, shaking her head. They have no idea that every ship they chase is leading them deeper into our trap. Alex nodded and looked at the tactical display showing hegemony positions across 12 star systems. The alien forces were spreading out, trying to occupy as much human territory as possible. They were making the same mistake that many armies throughout history had made, thinking that controlling empty space meant winning a war. Dr. Lisa Warren was no longer aboard the Discovery. She had been transferred to a covert intelligence vessel. That looked like an old cargo ship, but was actually packed with the most advanced sensors and computers that human technology could build. Her job now was to analyze the flood of information coming from the retreating human fleets. The intelligence ship drifted through an asteroid field, its sensors reaching out to gather every scrap of data about the enemy forces. Lisa worked 18 hours a day, building detailed profiles of hegemony commanders, learning their habits and weaknesses, mapping their supply lines and communication networks. What she found was both encouraging and terrifying. The hegemony was incredibly powerful, with technology that could destroy human ships from distances that seemed impossible. But they were also arrogant and overconfident. They had conquered so many species that they believed no enemy could surprise them or challenge their methods. On Earth, Admiral Ryan Collins stood in the deep command center beneath Cheyenne Mountain. The facility had been expanded far beyond its original purpose, with tunnels and chambers carved deep into the rock where thousands of people worked around the clock. President Maria Santos stood beside him, watching the holographic display that showed the positions of hegemony fleets across human space. 200 ships, the Admiral said, pointing to the red dots scattered across the star map. They think they are hunting scattered prey, But they have no idea they are walking into a trap we have been setting for 40 years, the president studied the display with worried eyes. Are you sure our people can handle this? The enemy has so many advantages. Admiral Collins smiled, but it was not a happy expression. They have advantages in technology and numbers, but they also have weaknesses they do not even know about. They have never fought a species like us, one that grew up on a world where everything was trying to kill us. They expect us to fight like civilized beings, but we learned warfare from nature itself. The colonies that had fallen to the hegemony were not really conquered. Most of the civilian populations had been evacuated weeks before the attacks, hidden in deep underground shelters or aboard disguised transport ships. The few humans who stayed behind were volunteers, soldiers, and intelligence officers who would watch the enemy and send information back to the hidden command centers. Commander Turner received new orders through the secret communication network. Instead of running toward Earth, the WASP and its squadron were to take position in the outer asteroid belt of the Ross 128 system. There they would wait with dozens of other human ships, all of them hidden and silent, preparing for the moment when the trap would be sprung. The waiting was the hardest part. Alex and his crew spent days drifting through the asteroid field. Their ship powered down to minimum levels to avoid detection. They listened to enemy communications and watched as hegemony fleets moved deeper into what they thought was conquered territory. Kelly intercepted a message from a hegemony fleet commander to his superiors. Human resistance has completely collapsed. The alien officer reported, "We are meeting no organized opposition. The species appears to have abandoned most of their territory without a fight. Request permission to begin resource extraction operations." Sam Peterson, the engineer who had served aboard the Discovery, was now on New Boston. But he was not a prisoner of the hegemony occupation force. He was hidden in the deep tunnels beneath the colony's industrial complex, leading a network of resistance fighters who had spent 3 days watching and learning about their enemies. The hegemony soldiers were efficient but predictable. They established patrol routes and guard schedules that never changed. They set up their command posts in the most obvious locations. They treated the conquered colony as a peaceful occupation zone rather than hostile territory. This was exactly what the human resistance had hoped for. Sam and his people knew every tunnel, every service passage, every hidden room in the colony. They had food and weapons cached in dozens of locations. Most importantly, they had detailed information about enemy patrol patterns, guard rotations, and weak points in the alien defenses. Dr. Warren, monitoring communications from her intelligence ship, began to see patterns in the hegemony deployment. The alien forces were making mistakes that any human military officer would recognize as dangerous. They were concentrating their forces in central locations instead of spreading them out. They were using communication frequencies that could be intercepted and decoded. They were treating occupied territory as secure instead of maintaining constant alertness. "They are fighting the last war," she reported to Admiral Collins during one of their encrypted communication sessions. "They are using tactics that worked against other alien species, but they have never faced an enemy that fights the way we do." The Admiral's response was brief but full of grim satisfaction. "And they are about to get an education they will never forget." As the hegemony fleets settled into their occupation positions, thousands of human ships and soldiers waited in hiding. The enemy thought they had won a quick and easy victory, but they had actually walked into the largest trap in the history of space warfare. Soon they would learn the difference between conquering territory and defeating an enemy that refused to surrender. The attack began at exactly the same moment across 7 star systems. Human forces that had seemed to vanish into the darkness of space suddenly appeared from asteroid fields, gas giant rings, and nebula clouds where they had been hiding for weeks. The hegemony fleets, scattered and confident in their easy victory, found themselves facing an enemy they had never imagined. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Discovery as his ship led a squadron of 12 vessels toward the hegemony staging area in the TRAPPIST system. The Discovery no longer looked like a research vessel. Hidden panels had opened to reveal plasma cannons and missile launchers. That had been built into the ship's structure from the very beginning. The other ships in his squadron were the same, appearing to be cargo haulers and survey craft, but actually carrying enough firepower to cripple ships 10 times their size. The hegemony sensors barely registered the approaching human vessels. Earth stealth technology, developed during the paranoid years of the Cold War and refined over centuries of constant improvement, made the human ships nearly invisible until they were close enough to strike. By the time the alien fleet realized they were under attack, the first wave of human missiles was already hitting their targets. Lieutenant Kelly Brooks coordinated the battle from her tactical station, her voice calm and steady as she directed. Targeting information to the other ships in the squadron, the humans did not try to match the hegemony's massive firepower. Instead, they aimed for critical systems with surgical precision, crippling enemy vessels rather than trying to destroy them completely. "Target their sensor arrays first," Kelly called out over the communication system. "Blind them, then hit their engines and weapons, make them helpless, not dead." This was not mercy but tactics. A destroyed ship was gone, but a crippled vessel sent distress signals, called for help, and created panic among other enemy forces. The human strategy was to cause maximum confusion and fear with minimum resources. On New Boston, Sam Peterson emerged from the underground tunnels with 200 resistance fighters. They had spent 3 days watching the hegemony occupation force, learning their routines and identifying their weaknesses. The aliens had made the mistake of thinking that conquering a human colony would be like occupying any other world, but New Boston had been built by engineers who grew up on Earth, a planet where every structure had to survive hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and temperature changes that would kill most alien species. The colony's buildings were not just strong but designed to be modified quickly for different purposes. What looked like civilian infrastructure could become military fortifications in a matter of hours. Sam led his fighters through service tunnels that connected every building in the colony. The hegemony troops had never bothered to map these passages, because they assumed all the humans had either fled or surrendered. They had no idea that beneath their feet, a fully organized resistance army was preparing to strike. The uprising began when Sam's people simultaneously attacked 12 different hegemony positions. They did not charge into open battle like desperate civilians. Instead, they used tactics learned from centuries of human warfare, hitting the enemy where they were weakest and disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. Industrial equipment became weapons in the hands of people who knew how to use it. Mining lasers cut through alien armor like paper. Construction robots, reprogrammed by human engineers, turned into mobile weapons platforms. The colony's life support systems, which the aliens had assumed were under their control, became tools of warfare as the humans cut power to enemy positions and flooded their strongholds with toxic gases. Dr. Lisa Warren, monitoring alien communications from her intelligence ship, watched as panic spread through the hegemony command structure. Their officers were reporting impossible things: human vessels appearing where sensors showed empty space, ground forces emerging from planets that were supposed to be evacuated, coordinated attacks by enemies who seemed to know their every move. "Command, this is Fleet Group 7, one hegemony officer transmitted in desperation. "We are taking heavy casualties from an enemy that should not exist. The humans are not fighting like any species we have encountered. They appear to be using our own tactical data against us." Lisa smiled as she recorded the transmission. The aliens were finally beginning to understand that they were not fighting a conventional enemy. The humans were using information warfare, psychological tactics, and guerrilla fighting methods that no other species had ever developed. Captain Morrison's squadron completed its attack on the TRAPPIST staging area in less than 2 hours. Of the 47 hegemony vessels that had been stationed there, 31 were now drifting helplessly with disabled engines and weapons. The remainder were fleeing toward the outer system, broadcasting panicked reports about human forces that had appeared from nowhere. The Discovery had taken only minor damage, and none of the human ships had been destroyed. This was the result of tactics that the hegemony could not understand. Instead of engaging in direct combat, the humans had used speed, stealth, and precise targeting to neutralize a much larger force without suffering significant losses. Enemy fleet is in full retreat, Kelly reported from her station. They are transmitting on all frequencies, warning other hegemony forces about organized human resistance. Jake nodded with satisfaction. Fear was spreading through the enemy ranks faster than any weapon could travel. The aliens had expected to fight scattered groups of primitive survivors. Instead, they were facing a coordinated military force that seemed to know their weaknesses better than they knew themselves. Across human space, similar attacks were taking place. The hegemony fleets that had spread out to occupy conquered territory found themselves isolated and vulnerable. Human forces struck at supply lines, communication centers, and command ships, always appearing where they were least expected and disappearing before effective counterattacks could be organized. Commander Alex Turner's destroyer Wasp led a Volf pack of human ships against a hegemony battle group in the Ross 128 system. The aliens expected a traditional naval engagement, with fleets meeting in open space for a direct confrontation. Instead, the humans fought like their ancestors had on Earth's ancient oceans, using hit-and-run tactics against larger and more powerful enemies. The human ships darted in and out of the enemy formation, never staying in one place long enough to be targeted effectively. They used the asteroids and space debris as cover, turning the battlefield itself into a weapon. The hegemony commanders, trained in formal fleet tactics, found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to follow the accepted rules of space warfare. Sam Peterson's resistance forces on New Boston had taken control of the colony's industrial sector. The hegemony troops, designed for fighting in controlled environments, found themselves facing humans who treated lethal conditions as minor inconveniences. The aliens needed environmental suits to survive in areas where humans worked comfortably. In ordinary clothes, the psychological impact was devastating. The hegemony soldiers had been told they were fighting primitive beings from a backwater world. Instead, they found themselves outmatched by an enemy that seemed to thrive in conditions that would kill most civilized species. Dr. Warren intercepted another communication from the hegemony fleet command. We are not fighting an inferior species. The message read, we are fighting something that evolved in hell and learned to thrive there. These humans are not primitive. They are specialists in a type of warfare we have never encountered. The war was far from over, but the balance had shifted. The hegemony's easy victory had become a nightmare of coordinated resistance. The hunters had become the hunted, and the galaxy was about to learn what happened when you attack the children of the Deathworld. The battle for the Kepler 442 system became the moment when everything changed. Admiral Ryan Collins arrived with the UES Defiance, leading humanity's Ghost Fleet into open combat for the first time. These were ships that had spent decades hidden in deep space, their crews training in secret for exactly this kind of war. The Defiance was not the largest human ship, but it carried technology that no alien race had ever seen. Its hull was covered with adaptive armor that could change its properties based on incoming weapons. Its engines could accelerate the ship to speeds that should have killed the crew. Except humans had learned to survive forces that would crush most other species. Commander Alex Turner watched from the bridge of the Wasp as Admiral Collins' fleet took position near the system's outer planets. The human ships moved in formations that seemed random to alien observers, but were actually based on hunting patterns that Earth's ancestors had used for millions of years. They did not fight like a civilized navy, but like a pack of predators. Surrounding their prey, the hegemony had brought their largest battle fleet to Kepler 442, expecting to crush human resistance with overwhelming force. Their command ship was a massive vessel called the Eternal Dominance, carrying enough firepower to destroy planets. Its commander, Fleet Admiral Zethka, had conquered 17 different species and never lost a major battle, but Zethka had never fought humans before, and he made the mistake that many of his officers had already made. He expected the battle to follow the standard patterns of space warfare, with fleets meeting in open combat and the stronger side winning through superior numbers and technology. Captain Jake Morrison coordinated the evacuation of human research stations while simultaneously feeding targeting data to Admiral Collins' fleet. The Discovery sensors, originally designed for scientific observation, could penetrate alien stealth fields and identify weak points in enemy formations that military scanners might miss. The Hegemony flagship is moving into position for a direct assault, Jake reported over the tactical network. Its shields are powerful, but they have a rotation frequency that creates brief windows of vulnerability every 47 seconds. This was the kind of information that only humans would think to gather and use. Other species fought with brute force, but humans had learned to find the tiny weaknesses that could bring down even the mightiest enemy. The battle began when Admiral Collins ordered his ships to attack from 7 different directions at once. The Hegemony fleet tried to form defensive positions, but they found themselves facing an enemy that moved like liquid, flowing around their strong points and striking at their weakest positions. Commander Turner led his destroyer group in attacks against the alien supply ships. The Hegemony had brought massive logistics vessels to support their fleet, but they had not expected anyone to target non-combat ships. The human attack destroyed fuel supplies, ammunition storage, and repair facilities that the enemy fleet needed to continue fighting. "They are fighting like pirates," one Hegemony officer transmitted in frustration. "They attack our support vessels and avoid direct combat with our battleships. This is not honorable warfare." Lieutenant Kelly Brooks, monitoring enemy communications, laughed at the message. "Honor does not win wars," she said. "Results do." On New Boston, Sam Peterson's resistance forces had evolved their tactics based on 3 weeks of continuous fighting. The Hegemony troops were still trying to hold the colony using conventional occupation methods, but the humans had turned the entire settlement into a weapon. The industrial facilities that the aliens wanted to control became death traps. Sam's engineers had modified the manufacturing equipment so that it would explode when enemy forces tried to use it. The colony's transportation system, which looked normal to alien observers, actually carried hidden sensors and weapons that could track and eliminate intruders. The Hegemony soldiers found themselves fighting an enemy that understood their environment better than they understood themselves. Every corridor could become a trap, every room could hide hostile forces, and every piece of equipment could be turned into a weapon. What made it worse for the aliens was that the humans seemed to enjoy to combat. While Hegemony troops needed constant resupply and medical support, the human fighters appeared to thrive on the stress and danger of continuous warfare. They slept in uncomfortable positions, ate rations that would poison most aliens, and fought effectively even when wounded or exhausted. Dr. Lisa Warren, analyzing intelligence reports from across human space, began to see the larger pattern of the war. The Hegemony was not just losing battles, but losing the will to fight. Their officers were reporting that human resistance was too costly to overcome, that the species from Earth was more dangerous than any enemy they had previously encountered. "They are requesting permission to use planet-killing weapons," she reported to Admiral Collins during a secure communication session. "Some of their commanders want to destroy human worlds rather than try to conquer them." The Admiral's response was grim but not surprised. That would be a mistake on their part. "We have been preparing for that possibility as well." The battle in the Kepler 442 system reached its climax when Admiral Collins ordered a direct assault on the Hegemony flagship. The human ships moved in a coordinated attack that looked suicidal to alien observers, but was actually based on careful calculations of enemy weapon ranges and reload times. Captain Morrison's Discovery led the attack, using its scientific sensors to guide other ships through the gaps in the enemy's defensive fire. The ship took heavy damage, but its crew continued to provide targeting data even as sections of the hull were torn away by alien weapons. "Hull breach on decks 4 and 5, Kelly reported, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Life support is failing, but sensors are still operational." Jake looked around the damaged bridge at his crew. They were all injured, their uniforms torn and stained with blood. but none of them had given up. This was what made humans different from other species. They could continue fighting even when logic said they should surrender. The discoveries. Final sensor reading allowed Admiral Collins to target the exact weak point in the Hegemony flagship's shields. The Defiance fired a single precise shot that penetrated the alien vessel's defenses and disabled its main weapons. The Eternal Dominance, the ship that had conquered 17 worlds, was now drifting helplessly in space. Fleet Admiral Zethka transmitted his surrender on all frequencies. "The Hegemony fleet yields to the human forces," he announced. "We request terms for the cessation of hostilities." But the war was not over. Across human space, other battles were still raging as Hegemony forces tried to retreat from territories they could no longer hold. The humans followed them, not seeking revenge but ensuring that the alien fleets could never again threaten Earth or its colonies. Commander Turner's Wasp was among the ships pursuing the retreating enemy fleets. The same hit-and-run tactics that had defeated the Hegemony's main forces now prevented them from regrouping for another attack. The humans hunted their enemies across dozens of star systems, always striking and then disappearing before effective. Retaliation was possible. Sam Peterson, now promoted to colonel and placed in charge of New Boston's defense forces, watched as the last Hegemony troops evacuated the colony. The aliens who had come as conquerors were leaving as refugees, dependent on human mercy for safe passage to neutral territory. The galaxy was learning a lesson that would not be forgotten. The quiet species from the Deathworld had revealed themselves to be the most dangerous military force in known space. They had not won through superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but by being exactly what their harsh planet had made them, survivors who never gave up and never stopped adapting to new challenges. 6 months after the war began, President Maria Santos stood before the Galactic Council aboard the UES Constitution in Earth orbit. The same alien representatives who had dismissed humanity as primitive scavengers now watched in silence as she delivered the terms of peace. The Hegemony's invasion fleets had been scattered, their leadership in chaos, their military doctrine proven worthless against an enemy they had never bothered to understand. Admiral Ryan Collins stood beside the president as representatives from 12 alien species listened to words they had never expected to hear from a human leader. The Constitution was not the largest ship in Earth's fleet, but it represented something that the galaxy had not seen before, a species from a death world that had chosen to protect rather than conquer. "The war is over," President Santos said, her voice carrying across the vast chamber where alien diplomats sat in their environmental suits and breathing apparatus. "But the galaxy has learned something that cannot be unlearned. We are not the primitive beings you thought we were. We are the children of a world that tried to kill us and failed." Commodore Jake Morrison, promoted after the Battle of Kepler 442, commanded a patrol fleet that monitored the former Hegemony territories. His Discovery had been rebuilt with new armor and weapons, but it still carried the same scientific equipment that had helped win the war. The ship's mission now was to ensure that evacuated human colonies could safely return to their worlds. The aliens who had once occupied those worlds were now refugees, dependent on human protection from their former allies who blamed them for the military disaster. The irony was not lost on Jake or his crew. The species that had been dismissed as barbaric was now providing humanitarian aid to the same forces that had tried to destroy them. Dr. Lisa Warren had been appointed as Earth's first director of xenological intelligence, overseeing the analysis of captured alien technology and military doctrine. Her research stations, once hidden in remote systems, now operated openly as humanity established its presence throughout formerly hostile space. The work was challenging because it required understanding not just alien technology but alien thinking. The Hegemony species had developed weapons and tactics based on their own evolutionary history, but they had never encountered an enemy that had evolved under the extreme conditions of a death world. They built their military doctrine around the assumption that all intelligent species would think like them. Lisa explained to Admiral Collins during one of their regular briefings. They never considered that a species might develop different approaches to warfare based on different survival pressures. The Admiral nodded as he studied the reports from across human space, and now they know better. The question is whether they learned the right lesson. Captain Alex Turner, now commanding the rebuilt USOSESP, led humanity's new rapid response fleets. The same hit-and-run tactics that had defeated the hegemony now protected trade routes and colony worlds throughout human space. The galaxy's former predators had become its protectors, but the transition was not always smooth. Some alien species tried to test human resolve, thinking that the victory over the hegemony had been a fluke or that humans would become complacent. In peacetime, they learned quickly that Earth's military had not forgotten the lessons of the war. Human ships appeared wherever aggression threatened peaceful commerce, and their response was swift and decisive. "We do not seek to rule the galaxy," Alex told his crew during a mission briefing. "But we will not allow anyone else to rule it through force either. The strong do not have the right to prey on the weak, and we will enforce that principle wherever necessary." Lieutenant Kelly Brooks, now a commander and Alex's executive officer, coordinated the intelligence networks that kept human forces informed about potential threats. The communication systems that had been developed during the war now served to maintain peace by ensuring that no hostile movement could go unnoticed. Colonel Sam Peterson, the former engineer who had led the resistance on New Boston, was now governor of the rebuilt colony. The settlement had been reconstructed with improvements based on lessons learned during the occupation, but it maintained the same philosophy that had made human colonies successful. Everything was designed to be adaptable and resilient. The most remarkable change was in the children. Human and alien youngsters now played together in the colony's parks, learning each other's languages and customs. The war had been brutal, but it had also created opportunities for understanding that had not existed before. The next generation will grow up in a galaxy where humans are respected as equals, Sam told his wife as they watched their daughter playing with a young hegemony refugee whose parents had requested asylum on New Boston. They will not have to prove themselves the way we did. The formal peace ceremony took place on neutral ground at the Galactic Council Station. President Santos signed treaties with each of the former hegemony species, but the documents were more than simple peace agreements. They established new principles for interstellar relations based on mutual respect rather than domination. "We did not start this war," the president said in her address to the assembled representatives, "but we finished it. The galaxy is wide enough for all of us, but it is not big enough for anyone who thinks they can prey on the weak. We are the children of a death world, and we remember every lesson it taught us." Admiral Collins watched the ceremony from the Constitution's bridge, surrounded by officers who had served through the entire war. They had all been changed by the experience, not just as military personnel, but as representatives of humanity. "In a larger galaxy, what happens now?" Commander Brooks asked. "We have proven that we can fight, but can we build a lasting peace?" The Admiral considered the question carefully. "Peace is not built by the strong alone," he said finally. "It requires cooperation from everyone. Our job is to make sure that cooperation is voluntary, not forced." Dr. Warren published her final report on the war 6 months after the peace. Treaties were signed. The document became required reading at military academies throughout human space, but its conclusions were surprisingly simple. Humanity had not won through superior technology or brilliant strategy, but by being true to their nature as survivors. "We adapted to every challenge the enemy presented," she wrote. "We turned our perceived weaknesses into strengths and used our knowledge of harsh environments to overcome technologically superior opponents. Most importantly, we never gave up, even when logic suggested that surrender would be more practical." The galaxy settled into a new pattern of relations with humanity as one of the major powers. Trade routes that had been controlled by the hegemony were now protected by human fleets. Disputed territories were mediated by human diplomats who had proven they could enforce their decisions. Species that had been oppressed by stronger neighbors found protection under the guarantee that Earth would not allow unprovoked aggression. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the Discovery as his ship patrolled the outer reaches of human space. The stars looked the same as they had before the war, but everything else had changed. Humanity was no longer hiding in the shadows, no longer dismissed as primitive scavengers from a backwater world. The communication system chimed, and Kelly's voice came over the intercom. "Captain, we are receiving a distress signal from a Zephyrian merchant vessel. They report engine failure and request assistance." Jake smiled at the irony. The Zephyrians had been one of the species that looked down on humans before the war, treating Earth ships as barely worthy of notice. Now they were calling for help from the same primitive beings they had once scorned. "Set course to assist," he ordered, "and send a message to let them know we are coming." This was the new reality of the galaxy. Human ships were no longer ignored or dismissed, but welcomed as symbols of protection and stability. The species that had survived their death world had become the guardians of civilized space, not through conquest, but through the simple principle that the strong had a duty to protect the weak. The Discovery changed course toward the disabled. Zephyrian vessel, its crew ready to provide whatever assistance was needed. They carried medical supplies, repair equipment, and food that could sustain most alien species. More importantly, they carried the knowledge that had been earned through centuries of survival on a planet that never stopped testing its children. As the ship moved through the darkness between stars, Jake thought about the long journey that had brought humanity to this point. They had started as a species trapped on a single dangerous world, fighting for survival against ice ages, plagues, and natural disasters. Now they were the peacekeepers of the galaxy, respected and feared by civilizations that possessed technology. Beyond Earth's wildest dreams, the war had ended, but the real work was just beginning. Building a lasting peace would require the same qualities that had won the conflict: adaptability, determination, and the willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect what mattered. The children of the Death World had proven they could fight when threatened. Now they would prove they could lead when the galaxy needed guidance. The Discovery reached the stranded Zephyrian ship and began rescue operations, another small act in the ongoing effort to build a better galaxy. The humans worked with quiet efficiency.